was thinking about this week, but pictures have power. They have the power to sting. I've said this before, but it's difficult for me to walk past pictures of my 3 children when they were younger. They're all grown now. When they were younger, because it reminds me of such a sweet time that is now gone. Those days will never come back. They bring very special memories to my heart and mind, but it's also painful because you know that those days are over. I'm sure that many of you, as a result of broken relationships, have had to go through and delete pictures, boyfriend, girlfriend, maybe ex-wife, ex-husband, something like that, because those pictures can be a trigger. So pictures can sting. They have the power to sting. They also have the power to inspire. I was looking on Friday at some pictures, some really famous pictures of American soldiers storming the beaches of Normandy. And it was just, the courage, the fear in their eyes, and yet the courage to do their duty. That stuff can be inspiring. Pictures can warm your heart. They can also break your heart. They can transport you right back to a moment in your life or a moment in history. They're not confined to the place and time they were taken. They tell a story. Every picture tells a story. Pictures have power. Well, the Bible gives us lots and lots of pictures. We read story after story after story, and pictures are painted in our minds. The Bible gives us lots of pictures, pictures of betrayal, pictures of adultery, pictures of murder, of incest, failure, theft, selfishness, jealousy, fear, lying, cowardice. We see all of these pictures. We see it here in Genesis chapter 3, so much of that stuff. We have picture after picture of brokenness and lives in shambles, stained by sin. We see that beginning in Genesis chapter 3, all the way to the end of the Bible. But behind all those pictures of disaster, catastrophe, failure, destruction, behind all those pictures is one big picture that we see. A picture of God's grace meeting our failure with forgiveness, meeting our defiance with his mercy, meeting our collapses with tenderness and compassion. I've read this quote to you before, and I'll always go back to it because I think it's such a succinct summary of what the Bible's really about. You know, the Bible can be an intimidating book. It can be a confusing book. It's confusing to me. Different places in the Bible are hard to understand, and unless we understand what the entire Bible is about, we'll get lost. And I think the best summary of what the whole Bible is about comes from my friend Sally Lloyd-Jones, who wrote this in the introduction to her Jesus Storybook Bible. Some people think the Bible is a book of rules, telling you what you should and shouldn't do. The Bible certainly does have some rules in it. They show you how life works best. But the Bible isn't mainly about you and what you should be doing. It's about God and what he has done. Other people think the Bible is a book of heroes, showing you people you should copy, people to emulate. The Bible does have some heroes in it, but, as you'll soon find out, most of the people in the Bible aren't heroes at all. They make big mistakes, sometimes on purpose. They get afraid, they run away. At times, they're downright mean. No, the Bible isn't primarily a book of rules or a book of heroes. The Bible is most of all a story. It's an adventure story about a young hero who comes from a far country to win back his lost treasure. It's a love story about a brave prince who leaves his palace, his throne, everything, to rescue the ones he loves. There are lots of stories in the Bible, but all the stories are telling one big story. The story of how God loves his children and comes to rescue them. It takes the whole Bible to tell this story. And at the center of the story, there is a baby. Every story in the Bible whispers his name. He is like the missing piece in the puzzle, the piece that makes all of the other pieces fit together. I think that is a beautiful and apt description of what the Bible as a whole is all about. We sometimes think, like she mentions, that it's primarily a book that shows us how to live. It's primarily a book of rules and regulations. It's primarily a book that tells us how to live so that we can ensure that we stay in God's good graces. A lot of other people, as she mentioned, think that the Bible is simply a moral handbook. We can go and read story after story about these great people of the faith that we should emulate. And I think Sally rightly points out that that's not primarily what the Bible is about at all. It's not primarily about us and what we have done or what we should do. It's primarily a story about God, who He is, what He's done. You see, the Bible paints one overarching picture. It's a picture of how God rescues a broken world by coming Himself to clean up the mess that we made. The Bible is one big picture of big sinners being met by an even bigger Savior. It's one big picture of grace. That's what it is. And this means that the Bible is not a picture of how to live a good life. It's not what it is, first and foremost. It's a picture of Jesus, who is the only solution to our failure to live a perfect life. Remember, you've heard me say it time and time again, good doesn't cut it with God. Good isn't good enough with God. It's perfection or failure. And if we fail to be perfect, then we need someone to be perfect for us. And the Bible is the story of that person who came to be perfect for us in order to make us right with God forever, so that there will never be anything you can do or fail to do that would ever cause God to leave you or stop loving you. So for the next 6 weeks, as I mentioned, we're going to look at 6 different episodes. I haven't figured out what those are yet. I'll figure them out as time goes on. Probably 3 in the Old Testament, like I said, and 3 in the New Testament. But we're going to look at 6 different episodes that give us crystal clear pictures of God's grace. And I want to start at the beginning. I started in Genesis 3 for a reason, partly because this is where grace shows up, but also because, as I said, it really sets the stage for why grace is even necessary. I want to start in this particular garden. You know the story, whether you grew up in church or didn't grow up in church, you know the story of Adam and Eve. A lot of people know the story of Adam and Eve. God created Adam, God created Eve. He spoke all things into existence, as the old theologians used to say, ex nihilo, which means out of nothing. God wasn't working with raw material. He created all the material necessary. He spoke everything into existence, and his prize creation was the creation of Adam and Eve. They were the only thing in all of God's created order that would resemble him, that would be bearers of his image. And God put them in this amazing garden and gave them everything they needed. He put them in paradise. They had it all. And as we read a few minutes ago, they blew it all. Now, the common phrase used to describe this episode is the fall of man. That's the phrase that theologians have used over the years to describe Genesis chapter 3. This is the chapter in the Bible that describes the fall of man. And while I understand what they mean when they say that, the word fall is a bit misleading, because Adam and Eve's sin was not first a plunge into something low. It was an upward rebellion. It was an upward fall. God had drawn a line and told Adam and Eve not to step over it. There was a realm above that belonged to God alone. And he didn't do that because he was afraid that if they crossed the line, he would then have some competition. He said that to them, and he gave them that line. He drew that line in the sand because he knew that there were certain things that only he could do. They couldn't run the universe. Only he could do that. They couldn't be God. Only he could do that. The burden of being God rested on God's shoulders alone. And the devil comes around in the form of a serpent and says, don't believe that for a minute. Don't believe that. God knows that if you step over the line, you won't die. He's just saying that to scare you. But he knows that you will become your own gods. And God doesn't want that. He wants to suppress you. He wants you to remain dependent on him. He wants to be in control of you. He's a control freak. So he gave you this test, and he drew this line in the sand and told you not to cross over it because God wants to save his space for himself. He's got a divinely sized ego. You will be free from depending on him. That's what he doesn't want. You'll be independent. Well, that was too good to pass up. That sounded really, really good to Adam and Eve. And ever since Genesis chapter 3, we've been trying to live our lives without God. In big ways, small ways, we've been trying to be our own God. In big ways, small ways. Now, I've always struggled with this story, to be quite honest with you, for a handful of reasons. But the primary reason is I feel like I'm suffering for someone else's mistake. They screwed it up, not me. Well, why should I have to be this broken person living in a broken world with other broken people because of something that someone else did that long ago? I mean, it's not my fault. It's their fault. They're the ones who got us into this mess. Why do I have to live in it? Why should we all have to suffer because of their screw up? It's not fair. If it had been me, I would have made a different choice. If the two people in the garden would have been Tullian and Stacy rather than Adam and Eve, we could have all been spared of this mess, okay? Now, as silly as that sounds, I mean, that has been my struggle. Why in the world, at the heart of my struggle regarding why do I have to suffer for what someone else did, there is this assumption that if I had been there, I would have made a different choice. That's the assumption. I would have chose wisely. But here's the truth. God chose them to be the representatives of the entire human race. And that means that there is no time in human history when you are more perfectly represented than in that garden, because your representatives were chosen perfectly by a perfect God. And that means that every single one of us would have done the exact same thing. You could even go so far as to say their decision was our decision. Plus, the other thing that helped me sort of get through this struggle over the years was if we object, and that's the objection. We object to God allowing one person to act for all of us. Why? Why should God allow one person to act for all of us? But if we object to God's allowing one person to act perfectly for another person, that would be the end of the Christian faith. Because the flip side of that coin is that our entire faith rests on the same principle, that through the actions of another man, we're all rescued. Okay, and we're going to look at that in a minute. The Bible describes 3 monumental transfers. Okay, if you can understand this, you can understand sort of the plot line of the Bible. The Bible describes 3 monumental transfers. Adam's guilt to us, our guilt to Jesus, and Jesus' righteousness to us. Those are the 3 transfers, what the early church father Athanasius called the great exchange or the glorious exchange. 3 monumental transfers. Adam's guilt to us, our guilt to Jesus, and Jesus' righteousness to us. And the greatest proof that we would have made the same choice, if you want more proof, is the fact that all of us are addicted to trying to save ourselves still. We're still fighting for independence from God. Still. Some of you may say, well, I don't. I have fully surrendered. No, you haven't, okay? Ask your husband or your wife or the people closest to you. You haven't. Neither have I. I mean, we try in a variety of different ways to save ourselves. We try to save ourselves through becoming great, through getting married. Can't tell you how many couples I've counseled over the years who by about the second or third premarital counseling session, I have to say, you guys are going to be in trouble if you don't stop looking to the other person to save you. You're thinking that this is going to solve all your problems and make you happy forever. You're looking to this person to be for you what only God has promised to be. So we try to save ourselves through getting married. We try to save ourselves by having children sometimes. Maybe that will make me feel valuable and important. Maybe the significance I crave will come if I can have a child, and certainly if I can raise successful children. We try to save ourselves by winning, by gaining respect, by getting approval, by looking good, feeling good, being right, being smart, accomplishing something that will make others think that we're important, pursuing power, pursuing influence. And that's just a short list of the ways we try to save ourselves. We have been, since Genesis chapter 3, trying to save ourselves, trying to be our own God, trying to live without God. We live with the burden of thinking that our value is tied to what we do, what we don't do, what we can accomplish, and who we can become. All of that is proof that we would have made the same decision, because we're making that same decision every day, And this story, the story of Adam and Eve, illustrates that looking to anyone or anything smaller than God for the strength, security, love, significance, and rescue that we crave is futile. Futile. God gave them everything they could have ever wanted, everything they could have ever asked for. God gave it to them, and they squandered it. They squandered it. In selfishness and foolishness, they squandered it. They spit on the gift that he gave them. And God could have bailed right then and there. He was under no obligation to do anything for them or for us. He could have bailed. He could have been like, man, you guys suck. I'm going to Pluto, and I'm going to create a whole nother race of people that are going to actually do what I tell them to do. I mean, he could have bailed right then. He could have bailed right there. He could have left them. He could have left us, but he didn't. Now, I want to back up for a second and handle what I believe to be a somewhat thorny theological question, which is this: could God have stopped all of this from happening? Okay, I mean, he's God. He's the creator of all things. Could he have stopped this from happening? And if he could have, why didn't he? Okay, now some people argue that God couldn't have prevented this mess from happening because he gave us a free will. And the way they talk about free will is as if our free will or our power to make choices, however you want to define it, and there is a long, rich theological and philosophical conversation that's been happening for thousands of years regarding what free will actually is. But oftentimes people go, well, of course, I remember somebody saying this to me when I was young, not you, mother, although it was my mother, who said, God is a gentleman, and he will not interfere with our choices. Now, my mother and I have had this conversation, so I'm not saying anything to you guys that I haven't said to her, but that's thankfully not true. The fact of the matter is, whatever free will we think we possess, it's not more powerful than God. Our choices don't have the power to restrict God. We're not more powerful than God. Our capacities don't have the capability of derailing God. It's not like God was sitting there going, oh, please, don't, gosh, why? Okay? I mean, that paints a picture of God as being so small and impotent. I mean, how could God not be able to stop this? And if he could, why didn't he? Thankfully, God acts above and beyond and in spite of our choices all the time. All the time. So then why didn't he stop them? Well, this really gets to the point of pictures of grace. One theologian that I read years ago when I was struggling with this, years ago when I was in college, and I was really struggling with this. I was wrestling with the idea that God is sovereign, that he's in complete control of all things, and if he is in complete control of all things, why didn't he stop this from happening? And the Bible doesn't really give any kind of exhaustive answer to that question. It just doesn't. It's a bit mysterious. It tells us that God is in control of all things, that God is good. It also tells us that Adam and Eve are responsible for the choice that they made. So there's this paradox, there's this mystery that surrounds this question. But this theologian that I read in college said something that was really, really good, and I think it's exactly right. He said there are certain things about who God is, certain aspects of his character that we would never know had he not allowed sin to enter into the created order. Things like forgiveness. Gosh, we revel in the amazing forgiveness of God, but we would know nothing about God as a forgiver because there would be nothing for God to forgive. Mercy. Gosh, we thank God and revel in his mercy because he's so merciful, but there would be nothing for God to show mercy to if he hadn't allowed sin to enter into this world. Grace, this giving of undeserved favor. So you see, the wisdom of God is that he allows something that we do, and this happens in our lives also. He allows things that we do, messes that we make, to become the platforms by which he gets to show us more and more of who he is. So while that may not satisfy everybody, that answer, it certainly satisfied me. It made sense to me that there are certain things about God's eternal nature, his attributes, that we would not know had he not allowed all of this to happen. So God could have said, listen, Adam, Eve, you want to be your own God? Fine, go for it. I'm out of here. He could have said that. Like I said before, he was under no obligation to do anything for us or for them, but he didn't. In the face of their cataclysmic failure and the guilt and shame that came with it, God made them a promise. Made them a promise that the seed of the woman would one day come and crush the head of the serpent. Now, I don't know how much sense that made to Adam and Eve back then. They were probably like, what? What? But we look back now and we're able to see exactly what he was talking about, because the entire Old Testament unfolds in greater detail this original promise that God made. And when you read through the Old Testament books and the history of Israel and the minor and major prophets, and you read through the entire Old Testament, you see that this promise that God was going to send someone to clean up the mess that we made, that the seed of the woman was going to one day come and crush the head of the serpent. This promise develops, it takes shape. It starts off kind of esoteric and black and white, and it gets more solid and becomes more colorful until we get to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and we see that promise fulfilled in the person of Jesus. So the entire Old Testament is a prediction of this rescuer that's coming. And the entire New Testament is a presentation of the rescuer that came. So the Bible tells one story, it paints one picture, and it points to one figure, namely Jesus. Even here, in Genesis chapter 3. We don't get to Jesus when we get to the New Testament. Every story, as Sally said, whispers his name. We see it here. So in the face of all of their guilt and their shame, in the face of their cataclysmic failure, God makes them this amazing promise. In other words, he's saying, listen, this is a mess. You guys created it, but I've got a plan in place that will fix this once and for all. Once and for all. He painted a picture of a second Adam, another garden, a different tree. I want to flip to Romans chapter 5. Romans 5, I'm going to read 2 verses, 18 and 19. A direct connection between Genesis chapter 3 and what happened there in Romans chapter 5. Romans chapter 5, verse 18 and 19. The Apostle Paul says, yes, Adam's one sin brings condemnation for everyone, but Christ's one act of righteousness brings a right relationship with God and new life for everyone. Because one person disobeyed God, all became sinners. But because one other person obeyed God, all will be made righteous. What he's talking about there is this second Adam. This other person who is going to come. Jesus is the second Adam. What does that mean? Well, he explains what that means. It means that just as Adam represented us and his disobedience brought death to us all, so Jesus represented us and his obedience brought life to us all. A second Adam. Here's a couple of creative ways to put it. The first Adam turned from the Father in a garden. The last Adam turned to the Father in a garden, the Garden of Gethsemane. The first Adam's sin brought thorns to us. We just read that. The last Adam wore a crown of thorns for us. The first Adam substituted himself for God. The last Adam was God substituting himself for us. The first Adam sinned at a tree. The last Adam bore our sin on a tree. The first Adam brought condemnation on mankind. The last Adam brought salvation for mankind. The whole Bible tells this story. I've said at different times in different places that you could almost read the whole Bible as a book between the trees. The tree in the garden and the tree of the cross. And everything that Adam failed to do there, Jesus succeeded over here. And while this brought death and condemnation to all of us, this brings life and salvation to all of us. That in a sense, you could say that the second Adam reversed the curse of the first Adam. Where Adam failed in Eden, Jesus succeeds in Gethsemane. Adam's selfishness in Eden took life from us. Jesus' selflessness in Gethsemane gave life to us. First Adam, second Adam. The essence of sin, you could put it like this. The essence of sin is man substituting himself for God. That's the first Adam. While the essence of salvation is God substituting himself for man. That's the second Adam. We put ourselves where only God deserves to be, first Adam. God puts himself where only we deserve to be, second Adam. So the whole point that Paul is making in Romans chapter 5 is that God is not the God of second chances. I've said this for years, that God is not the God of second chances. He's the God of one chance and a second Adam. You see, I don't know about you, and I've shared this before, but if God is only the God of second chances, I'm screwed. I mean, I've needed more than a second chance since I woke up this morning. Okay, so have you. We need so much more than a second chance. We need a third and a fourth and a fifth and on and on and on and on and on and on it goes throughout our entire lives. So while I understand the sentiment between the idea that God is the God of second chances, I think it's much better than that. It's bigger than that. That God is the God of one chance. We blew it. And he's the God of a second Adam who came to fix the mess we made forever so that because of him, we live our lives under a banner that reads, "It is finished." Does that make sense? If not, I'll just keep talking. I'll talk and talk and talk. Let me just sort of wrap it up with this. I'm a desperate man. I know myself well enough to know that most of the time I feel like I'm hanging on by a thread. Now, I don't feel like I'm in danger of doing anything catastrophically stupid, although I'm capable. But I'm always aware of my desperation, my fears, my insecurities. just the different things that frustrate me. I know my own personal history proves to me that I am capable of ruining my life and the lives of those around me with one or two really bad decisions. As I've shared before, a friend of mine said years ago that all of us are 3 steps away from being the next tabloid headline, and most of us are on day 2. Okay, I think that's true. I'm very aware of that. I'm a desperate man. I know that I am. I feel that I am. And if what we say here at the sanctuary week after week isn't true, if Christianity is something different than what we trumpet here, I don't have a shot. A shot. Either do you. If our hope in life depends on us, our ingenuity, our endurance, our search for something or someone that will fill the inescapable void we all feel, we'll be lost. Lost. A better marriage, a better relationship with our kids, a better job, better health, more financial security, more accomplishments, none of this will do it. None of it will do it. I love Jim Carrey's line from years ago where he said, I wish everyone could be really rich and really famous so that they could see it is not an answer for anything at all. I mean, we spend our lives, philosophers and theologians for years have documented this, man's search for significance and security, man's search for value to fill what Pascal called this God-shaped void in our souls. Philosophers and theologians have been talking about this, have been writing about this for hundreds of years, that we were made for God, as Augustine said, and our hearts are restless until we find our rest in Him. We look under every rock and behind every tree for things that we think will make us happy, things that we think will solidify us, things that we think will eradicate our fears and our insecurities. If I can just be with that person, or if I can just do this thing, or if I can just arrive over there or get in with these people or whatnot, then I'll finally be happy. I'll feel safe in this world. I'll feel secure. I'll feel satisfied and content. We build our lives so often on an endless catalog of God replacements, non-gods. We listen to this anti-gospel of do more, try harder, get better, climb higher, and we find ourselves no further along and a lot more worn out than when we started. So if what we say here, I know that I'm kind of a one-trick pony. I'm proud of that. I strive to be that. That's very intentional. I could get up here and give you guys moral life lessons till I die. And all that would do is sort of, address the fruit on the tree without actually getting to the root of the problem. So if what we say here week after week after week isn't true, I'm exiting stage left. Then Christianity's not for me. It's just flat out not for me. If this is about me and what I need to do, my ability, my potential, this is about me, then I'm in trouble. So are you. The hope of life, thankfully, rides on the shoulders of another. One who succeeded where we fail, one who was strong for us, good for us, obedient for us, pure for us, righteous for us, everything for us, so that Jesus plus nothing equals everything. My friend Nadia sums it up like this: God simply keeps reaching down into the dirt of humanity and resurrecting us from the graves we dig for ourselves through our violence, our lies, our selfishness, our arrogance, our addictions. And God keeps loving us back to life over and over and over and over again. That is one big, mind-blowing picture of grace. Grace. always grace. Let's pray.